Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt and welcome to New Brick Workshop. Now, there haven't been very many woodworking shows lately, but life is starting to come back to normal. So I've written to one or two of the manufacturers and asked if they've got anything new, anything that I can show. And I'm very lucky today to be able to borrow a machine from Trend, which is one of their most recent additions to their catalogue, and it's a cordless router. Now let me just say at this stage, I've borrowed this machine, it's going back shortly, and I've not been paid to make this video. So let's have a close look at Trend's cordless router. Now the machine I've been sent is the T18S R14, and this particular one comes with a 4 ampere hour battery, and it comes in a box with just about everything you can imagine you need, and I believe this package is about £329. Now in this particular version of the kit, which comes in the big box, you get the following items. Obviously the router itself, I'll talk more about its characteristics shortly, a 4 ampere hour battery, charger. Now for this setup of the router, there's this fence. The router has 2 collets, although it's not obvious when you look at the packaging because it just says 1/4 inch collet, but it comes with a 1/4 inch and also an 8mm collet. It's got a dust collection attachment here. It comes with 1 guide bush, and this is about 16mm in diameter, and also for this configuration it comes with a centering mandrel, and this is really important if you're doing template work where having the cutter concentric with the guide bush is really important. Now the router body can be taken out of the plunge arrangement and put into a sub base here, which is perfect for when you want to use the router for trimming work, and there's a separate little dust guide that goes with that, and associated with that there's a little screw here to hold that in place. And for the guide bush there's a little packet with a couple of screws in, and needless to say you get instructions and guarantee information. Now despite it saying in one place that it's a 2-year guarantee and it says in another place it's a 3-year guarantee, I've looked on the Toolstation website, they sell this, and there it states clearly it's a 3-year guarantee. Now before I put the battery on, I'll just take you on a tour of the router itself. Now the most important thing about this router is that the motor is brushless. Brushless motors have a huge advantage over their predecessors. And first off is that you don't need to change the brushes, of course, because they're brushless. But being brushless means that they run more efficiently, so they take less power. Very important with a cordless tool because your power sits in a little box at the top. It also runs more quietly and cooler. And that's a great advantage because you don't need to have so many openings near the motor to let air to pass through, which means it stays relatively dust-free inside and means the whole thing is going to last longer. Now this is the plunge base which it's attached to at the moment. Now when this first came out of the box it was a little bit sticky, and this is not uncommon with things that have been sitting in storage or in a shipping container taking a long time to come from wherever it's manufactured. So what I did with this was I put some oil on these 2 shafts. I then exercised it a little bit to and fro. I had it upside down like this, made sure some oil went down into these bearings, exercised it again, then left it overnight, and I wiped off the excess very carefully. And now, as you can see, that's absolutely perfect. So if that happens to you, just follow those simple steps. Now on here you've got an on-off switch and also a lock, but I have my own personal rule, and I never ever change a router cutter or any other sharp implement on whatever cordless tool it is without taking the battery off. I always take a battery off. Collet here, as I said, this comes with an 8mm collet and also a 1/4 inch collet, even though it's not obvious from the literature that it's got this 8mm collet. Little button here as a shaft lock, and there is a spanner provided for the collet. There's a depth stop mechanism here which can be set just like any other router. At the back here is a plunge lock, so you can lock this in place when you've got the depth set where you want it. There's a release mechanism here so that you can take the router body away, and this now can be fitted into the other base. Now you note that this side is different from that side, and it's this side with the little bit of engine turning here, which goes on this side, and it allows you then to engage it, and with this knob alter the depth, and then you lock it like so when it's in place. And there's your little palm router for doing trim work. Now, in order to fit the dust shroud, it's very simple. We've got the router facing me here. I'm just going to turn it so it's around that way, and here there is a little screw knob which I will remove. And then on here there are two lugs. There's one there and there's one here, and there are two positions for these lugs to go, one in there and one there. So I'm going to feed this in like so, and I'll turn this round. There's a lug here which has to engage, and there's a lug here which has to engage. Once those two are engaged, we can then take this screw and then screw it through the hole here to secure the whole assembly in place. And so that's it, dust arrangement fitted, and you can still plunge the router in the normal way. Incidentally, this router in this configuration has a 60mm plunge range, which is really good for something of this size. And I shall fit the battery now, and if you look here, there are these two little contacts here, and look underneath the battery, you can see where those are going to go. So you turn the battery over, you slide it in from that end there, and then push hard, and it clicks in place. And to remove it, there's a red plastic tab here. You would press on that and then pull it backwards that way to remove it. Check the battery status, press this little button here, and that's 4 bars. The battery is virtually fully charged. Now, the operation of the tool, if you press the on button, nothing happens. What you have to do is put it into standby mode first, and when you do that, the little LEDs come on down below, and then you can press the start button. You stop the tool. Now, in the instructions it says in order to start the tool, you put it into standby mode, press that button, and then press the on button. It says then if within 10 seconds you press the go button again, it should start. It doesn't. So in order to make the tool work, you have to press the standby button followed by the on button. Turn it off, the tool comes to rest. In order to make it start again, standby mode. Simple as that. So it's slightly different from the instructions. So that's a safety feature, and as I said, I would never rely on that because I'm super cautious. If I'm changing a cutter, I will always remove the battery. Now, one thing to note when I turned it on then is that the noise level is not huge. However, I would still recommend that when you're using a router cutter in here, you have ear defenders, and you must also, of course, have eye protection. Well, I think it's time now to just run this and test it out on some real bits of wood. So I've put a Roman OG bit in there. I've got it set at the depth that I require. I've got a piece of wood clamped here. I'm now going to reinstate the battery, having got it all set up. That's it, battery's there. So final thing, ear defenders and safety glasses. And I hope you can see that is an absolutely super duper perfect cut. Now, we did get a little bit of dust coming out during that operation despite having the dust extractor connected, but then it's almost the nature of that type of router cut because it's all happening on the edge here. Most of the material is being blown out sideways, and so I've got a little bit on the floor. I've now put an 8mm collet in here, and I've got an 18mm cutter. I'm just going to reduce the speed down a fraction because it's quite a big cutter. I'm going to put this down to 4, and I'm going to cut a channel in here which is about 1 centimetre in depth. Now I'm all set up, got my extractor, safety glasses on, ear defenders on, and I've got my plunge depth set, so I'm ready to do this. Now, with my routers, I've put a continuous strip across here, and you may have noticed at the very end there, when that came off the end, I did a little wobble, but never mind. It cut that fine. Now, the dust that you see coming out, despite the fact we've got a dust extractor attached, is partly because you're doing this cut in a channel. The cut is perfectly reasonable, but the only place the dust can go is either straight up or out that way, and it tends to go that way. And the reason it's not all going up into the extractor is that there's a fairly large hole here, and so a lot of the effect of the extractor is lost. Right, now I'm going to change things around. I'm going to remove the 8mm collet, and of course that cutter I was using. I'm going to put the 1/4" collet in, and I've got a little rounding over cutter here, and use the trim base, and I'm going to put a little round over all the way around this piece of wood. Now, I've removed the battery to do this. I always like to do that, as you now know. Now, there's no need for me to take this fence off at this stage, nor any of this dust extraction stuff. All I need to do is undo this clip here, like so, and pull the motor body out. It's as simple as that. And my 8mm collet and that other cutter are there, so I'm going to remove that now. So I've loosened it off. I can remove that cutter. I can now take away the 8mm collet, put on the 1/4" collet, insert my new cutter in here. This is the rounding over cutter. Tighten it up. That's that. And just put these things out of the way. Now, when this goes into the trim base, if you look here, there's a little adjusting height adjuster, an adjusting knob there. And if you look on the body of the router motor, there's this scale here with this toothed piece there. Well, that toothed piece is going to engage with that little height adjuster. And when you've got it in place, it goes up and down like so. Now I need to get this adjusted for height. Now, this clamp is still loose, but I can adjust the height here with this knob, and you can now either eyeball it by looking across here to see whether it's in the right place, or offer it up to your piece of material. And if I were to offer it up to the piece of material, I can just see from where I am that that's going to be perfect. And when you've got it in the right place, lock that off. I can now fit the little extractor port. Now, there's a lug on the side here, which is near the tube that comes off, and that's going to fit in the hole there. And the other side is going to line up for a screw that goes through just there. And here's that screw, and tighten it up. And now that little dust port is reasonably secure. So, with that all done, I can put my dust extractor nozzle in here, and then I can put the battery in, and then do that little bit of trimming. And you probably can't see it, but I put a very, very shallow round over there, and that's rather good compared to that sharp edge. Now, there may be times when you want to use a guide ring, and whenever you're doing that type of work with a router, it's absolutely essential that the guide ring and the router cutter are concentric. Now, in order to get that right, you use a thing called a mandrel. And one is supplied with this, and it appears to me as though, it's got an 8mm section here and a 1/4" section there, so you could use it with whichever collet you prefer. And I'm going to now set this up so I can do the centering of this guide ring. Now, the screws are provided for the guide ring. They come in a little packet, so make sure you don't lose them. So I'm just going to put these screws in loosely They're not going to hold anything in place at all. They're just in there very loosely. So what I'm going to do first, I've taken that conical bit off there, and I'm going to install this part of the mandrel into the collet that's in here. And I'm just tightening it up a little bit, not completely. So that's that in there, and now I can lower this down and let that come into contact with the guide ring. Now this is the important part. This conical section should be pushing on the guide ring and making it centre. So its centre and the centre of the collet are in the same line. So once that's achieved, you can then tighten this up. And you need to maintain pressure on the conical section here, so it's always in contact with the guide ring as you're doing the tightening up. And that's that tight now. So that now has that guide ring concentric. So I could now do some template work, and I would know that no matter which direction or orientation I've got the router, it's always going to be cutting in the correct place. Right, it's now time for me to give you my opinion, and I'll do good points and bad points as I go through. I'm going to actually start with the manual. And the reason I'm starting with this is I'm very used to having tools sent from all sorts of companies, and their manuals are generally pretty poor. This manual I quite like, and the reason is that not only does it tell you how to use the router, but it also gives you some safety tips as well. So good tick in the box there for the manual. Now, as far as the overall impression of this router, I say it's super. It's light, it's easy to use, easy to set up, it's reasonably quiet. It's got that brushless motor, remember, so therefore it's not going to drain the battery particularly rapidly. And this particular set in the box comes with the trim base as well, which I think is really, really useful. You'll be surprised just how often you will use this, because if you're just taking a little chamfer off the edge of something or whatever, then you want something light and easy to use. And swapping between the two functions, as I demonstrated, is very easy. The dust port on here is quite solid. It feels solid, and as I plugged my hose in and out, it was fine. Incidentally, that internal diameter is slightly different than the internal diameter here, because I had to push down quite hard to get my hose in here, but it's only by a little amount. But this extractor port, I think you're going to have to be very careful that you don't break it, because it's just a little bit flimsy. But I've had some very expensive routers which have had the same problem, so just be aware of that. It's particularly useful. It comes with both an 8mm and a 1/4 inch collet, because you'll be surprised how many 8mm cutters that are now coming onto the UK market. And of course, if you're on the continent, you will be using a lot of 8mm cutters anyway. The Mandrel is okay, it does its job, but it is just a piece of plastic. The Mandrel I've got for one of my other routers is a little bit more solid, and means you can put a little bit more force to get things in the right place. Now, the supplied guide ring here has a diameter which is just over 16mm. It's actually 16.15 when I measured it. And that doesn't translate into an obvious imperial size, and therefore I think it's intended to be metric 16mm. Well, it's just slightly oversized. Now, my way of using guide bushes is to use a guide bush set and have a universal adapter fitted in the router. And I believe that if you look carefully at the Lee website, you will find an adapter plate that will fit on your router, and it will allow you to use then a family of guide bushes, the sort that you may have seen in my other videos. So that's what I would advise that you look for. And this is the sort of thing I mean. Now, this is not designed for this router. This is designed for one of my other routers. This is the adapter plate that screws onto the router. That gets centered using your mandrel, and then you can use guide rings which then fit in there, and there's a whole set of these in different sizes, and there's a little screw that screws on from underneath to tighten it up. And I've got a metric set of these, and they're really, really useful. So if you're going to start doing guide bush work, I would advise that you look for something like that. And one very minor final point is that the plastic case that is supplied, all these bits and pieces which fit down into little grooves in there, they're all terribly tight, and I found myself struggling to get some of these bits and pieces out from the box, but that's very minor. And if I were keeping this, I would take a piece of sandpaper and just relieve some of those little bits of plastic in the box so that the various components fitted nicely down in. But anyway, overall, it's a nice little router. It's easy to use, easy to set up. So I think it's a very useful bit of kit, and having those two bases and also the two size collets in there is particularly useful. But don't take my word for it. I know shows aren't easy to get to these days, but go into a store and have a look around, feel it in your hand, and maybe ask a few questions. So don't take my word for it. Go and look at one of these yourself and make up your own mind. You won't be disappointed. Many thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.